Welcome to Students Incorporated. I'm your host, Mr. Jason. Join me weekly as my students and I bring you content that's informative, positive, fun, and uplifting. This podcast is created and produced with the help of students from the International Community School of Bangkok. Welcome back to the show. Today we're going behind the scenes and talking to two people who help make things happen on campus. Have you ever walked into a school banquet or a student-led school celebration and wondered, how did they actually pull this off? Well, today we're joined by the ICS Student Council President and Vice President to talk about the grit behind the glamour. We're diving into the logistical puzzles of event planning, the pressure of representing the student voice, and their vision for this school year. But that's not all. We also are continuing our adventure story, The Mystery of St. Augustine. We have a full episode, but first let's hear our quote of the day and get some headline news.
Our quote of the day comes from Simon Sinek, a leader, an author, and a motivational speaker. Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge. This quote reminds us that true leadership isn't about titles, popularity, or power. In student council and in life, leadership means supporting your peers, listening to their voices, and creating an environment where everyone feels valued and included. It's about service, responsibility, and setting the tone for others to thrive. And that's our quote of the day. Now on some headline news.
Thank you for our quote of the day. Our first headline comes from Washington, D.C., reported by NPR. The U.S. Department of Education announced a new initiative encouraging schools to expand student leadership opportunities, including student advisory boards and peer mentorship programs. Education officials say that schools with strong student leadership programs often report higher student engagement and improved school climate. The initiative aims to give students a stronger voice in decisions that affect their daily school experience. Our next headline comes from London, published by the BBC News. A recent education report in the United Kingdom found that students who participate in leadership roles, such as student council or peer mentoring, develop stronger communication and teamwork skills. Educators say these programs help students build confidence and learn how to support others, reinforcing the idea that leadership is about responsibility, not just recognition. And finally, our last headline comes from Toronto, covered by CBC News. Several Canadian high schools are introducing new student voice platforms that allow students to share ideas directly with school administrators. Early results show increased participation in school events and improved collaboration between students and staff. School leaders say that the goal is to ensure every student feels heard and valued within their school community. And that's our headline news for this episode.
Thank you for the quote in the headline news. We're joined by two student guests who sit on the school council. We wanted to get some insight into their world and the activities they are responsible for while fulfilling their official duties for the high school student body. All right, let's jump into our first question.
Welcome to the show. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself, your grade, and your role within the Student Council?
Yeah, so my name is David, and I'm currently a senior in ICS. I've been in ICS for 13 years, and I currently serve as the Vice President of the Student Council.
And hello, I am IQ. I'm the President of the Student Council, also a senior at ICS, International Community School. And I've been at this school for 7 years.
So, what is StuCo and what role do they play in a high school?
So the Student Council encompasses a really broad stage or a really broad part of student life at school. Mainly, we would usually host events such as high school banquet or the Valentine's events or Christmas events for students. But in a more general sense, I would say we mostly handle things that aid in student life. So every year, aside from those events, we do things kind of in the background in terms of school policy and things related to student life. But most of what students will see is that we just host the main events for high school.
So this sounds like StuCo is a really important thing in high school. So we'd like to know, how did you feel when you were elected for your roles?
Ooh, I think I just felt really excited at first, but then I also felt nervous because who knew that I would be the Vice President of ICS? I just think it felt really surreal, and I was really looking forward to it. Yet I was also scared, am I gonna do good? Am I not?
I think the first thing I thought was that I was hungry. because I found out and I hadn't eaten food the entire day because I was so apprehensive about who would win the elections. But aside from that, I think I had like this newfound sense of nervousness, or essentially, for what was to come, because one thing was that I've never been in a position where I was leading a student body or kind of at the helm of something of this scale. And so I was really thinking about the next steps to take and how I would try and change student council to fit a new generation, or to become better than it was before, essentially.
So you talked about when you introduced Student Code that you guys plan like events for students. So how do you approach planning these things like banquet?
So with events like banquet, we would usually approach it with a very meticulous and kind of planned mindset. So the event's all the way in April 2026, but usually that is actually one of the first things we start thinking about at the beginning of our term. So we started thinking about it all the way back in September. And with events of this scale, where you have to reach out to a bunch of different companies and a bunch of places in order to contact for details about this event, we usually try to divide the tasks a lot with members of the student council and especially the executive committee.
Also, like, one thing I would like to add is we have to base our banquet venue off of previous events as well. So for example, like ICS Got Talent, where we made a sum of money and we can sort of choose where we can plan off to from that, and trying to get to know a lot of people and like utilizing all of your resources well is also really important. And for the roles, I believe that we sort of divide and conquer. We sort of try to reach out with all the connections that we have, and once we have them, then we plan as a team of which is the best place to go and which is the best place to like sort of host the event.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, like, we have to think about budget a lot in the student council, because I feel like we might be the only school where the school doesn't actually like support the student council in terms of finance. So all the money that we're using for these events, we have to raise ourselves, which is plays a really big part in kind of how we have to keep track and how we have to plan each event that we do in order to figure out, all right, what's a good venue for our budget, or we'd have to kind of predict how much money we'd make by the time banquet comes around.
So going back to the topic of leadership, what leadership style do you rely on most and why?
I believe the leadership style is trust. I believe that I'm really big on trust. So like, pretend if you say like, oh, okay, I can get this done by like tomorrow night or Friday, then I will trust that you'll be able to get it done by Friday. And I will trust that, okay, if something comes up, you'll sort of tell us first and we can sort of work around that.
I think David tends to be more of like the chill guy in the student council, whereas I try to be a bit more, I would say, command oriented, where if a member doesn't really do something that's up to standard or up to expectation, then I just have to kind of pull them aside and talk to them, because it's happened before. And I feel like it's a really good learning experience on how you should be approaching issues within a community from a calmer standpoint or from a logical standpoint. I really don't like it when people when they take out their anger on people in kind of a leadership scenario or in a scenario where you have to lead over others.
Trust is huge in leadership, and the idea of delegation and teamwork is so important. What inspired you to run for office, and how did you choose president and vice president? And did you campaign together?
Okay, so the thing with how I approached this was that I know that I'm naturally an introverted person, and I'm not really someone who speaks up that much. But what drives me forward is pretty much self-improvement. And I was in a position where I felt like I could be able to win an election for president. And so I just kind of ran with it. And with my experience in student council before, I felt like while it was a big step up, it would have still allowed me to grow a lot as a person in terms of obviously public speaking and also just kind of leading students or leading people in general.
Yeah, for me, it's quite a different story. Well, it kind of started in grade 9, and like I ran for class representative, and many people thought like, oh, okay, I was not fit for this role. I did not have the highest grade. I did not like perform the best. But then in reality, I feel like being class representative is about representing. It's about trust. So when I ran for vice president, like I wanted to show people that like, okay, you are capable of doing this. Don't let other people tell you you can't do this, you can't do that. You yourself should show them that you can do it.
We also ran for office together. And I think the logic behind that was simply just because people could see that we had a lot of good chemistry. We were really close friends. And oftentimes, some people do say that good friends shouldn't work together. But I feel like the fact that we already connect with each other so well only helps us to work better together. Like sometimes I don't even have to tell David that we need to work on this, even though I wanted to, and he just like starts working on it by himself, or like starts telling people to do things without me having to say it, which I think is probably in part because of the fact that we already know that we worked so well together. And I think this connection between us was really a big reason on why people elected both of us to be president and vice president.
Yeah, I agree. I always think that I work best in like presentations or projects when I'm working with my friends. So I totally see your point. And so it sounds like y'all are like really busy between like planning budgets and like keeping everyone in line, giving pep talks. So what's like a typical day of student leadership look like for you?
So the student council actually works on a weekly structure rather than a daily structure. Just because of the fact that we as students are so busy with all our extracurriculars that we actually can't end up working on student council things every day. And so the main focal point of the week will be our student council meetings, which is on a day 1.
Yeah. And in between the weeks, we also have set up deadlines. So let's say we have banquet on April. We have micro tasks that we have to achieve in order to achieve the big event or the goal in mind. So let's say the banquet is in a month and we have to release a post this week. This week we will try to work on the post and just get it done, and the next week it will be a different task. Let's say finding suppliers for the sound system.
So, moving on and graduating, I suppose you would like to leave a legacy, and sometimes leaving a legacy can mean leaving good parting advice. What advice would you give to the next student council members?
Ooh, I think something that often goes kind of under the radar in terms of the student council is really how well we connect to everyone in the student council. Because it functions as a hierarchy where the executive committee is at the top, and then it goes per public relations officers and then class representatives. And oftentimes what ends up happening is there's quite a gap between 9th or 10th grade class representatives and the executive committee. And so I really try to focus on connecting between all the members of the student council so that we can kind of keep it really close. I mean, we're obviously working with each other for an entire year, but in my previous experiences, there's always been kind of a gap. And so this year we've really tried to emphasize narrowing the gap and connecting better together as a committee.
And I just feel like having fun is also a big part. I mean, like, we do work a lot, that is true, but in those work, I just believe that it's really fun and it's a good experience to connect with people. And this experience, like, it's a very unique experience. You won't really experience this somewhere else.
So I'd just like to add that most people, when they think of the student council, they always envision like popular people or like really big leaders or kind of maybe even like the smartest people in the room, But I just like when you take a step back, you kind of see that we're also ordinary people, and we really do want to have fun as a student council as well. And so with these events, even though we're the ones managing and we're the ones organizing, I think there's really a new dimension when you start to think of it in terms of an activity that you can do for fun to help everyone, instead of just another task that you do as like a president or vice president in a way, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I really like your point about making the student council feel more connected, because sometimes like everyone's working together, it can really feel really discouraging if you're like feeling left out. So I really like that, piece of advice. And man, I can't believe we're already on the last question. There's a Chinese saying that good times fly really quickly. So we'll end with looking at the future. Do you have any plans after you graduate?
I will be studying economics in Chula, and after that, I would hopefully like to create my own business, and one day I would like to own a restaurant.
Right now, my plan as of now is to go study mechanical engineering at Yale University. And I feel like, well, I'm going to America. I'm going to be really far from my friends. But a really important aspect that I've learned from my experience as leader of the student council is how to actually connect with people, even though you're not always at the same place or at the same kind of in the same area. You might not always be on the same page, but if you try, you can still always connect with people.
Thank you for being our guest today, IQ and David, and for leading this year's Student Council and all the activities and planning sessions. It's time to shift gears now, but before we move into our second segment and continue our serial story, let me share a short announcement with you. Don't go anywhere, as we'll be right back.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Being informed about policy and politics is essential to understanding how decisions that shape our daily lives are made. From school governance and student representation to national education priorities, policies influence opportunities, resources, and community culture. When students take the time to learn how these systems work, they become better equipped to engage critically, ask informed questions, and participate meaningfully rather than passively. Awareness turns opinions into insight and interest into responsibility. An informed community can advocate for itself with clarity and purpose. This is why conversations around leadership and governance matter. Understanding the reasoning behind policies fosters transparency, trust, and more constructive dialogue between leaders and those they represent. Even a basic grasp of politics helps develop critical thinking, communication, and leadership skills that extend beyond campus life. When people understand the why behind decisions, they are more likely to contribute positively and collaboratively. Staying informed is not about taking sides. It is about being empowered to make a difference. And we are back. For this segment, we will bring you part 5 of our 10-part adventure story titled The Mystery of St. Augustine. But before we jump into part 5, here's a brief recap of part 4.
Inside a restricted subterranean vault beneath the Cathedral Basilica, the El Dorado team uncovered ancient etchings, soot-stained coquina carvings that shattered 4 centuries of official history. By decoding a 16th century Latin inscription, Gemina Onera, or Twin Burdens, Amanda and Hawthorne finally secured physical proof of a second, undocumented shipwreck. This discovery confirms that while the world has been searching for just one ship, the true prize is a ghost ship laden with treasure that has been hidden for over 400 years. Meanwhile, Tom Reynolds and the local police secure a breakthrough of their own using grainy CCTV footage from the night of the Historical Society theft. Thanks to CC's sharp eye, a distinctive J logo on the suspect's baseball cap was identified as the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, providing the first tangible link to the agents of the table. As the criminal crew prepares to use forged credentials to infiltrate a university forensics lab, the net begins to tighten around their operation. even as the El Dorado team prepares to take their search elsewhere. And now, without further ado, here's part 5, titled The Property.
Upon reaching Jacksonville, chairs 3, 4, and 5 book a small hotel room near the university, where they plan to infiltrate the following morning. Also, during their drive up, they had received detailed information from second chair about Eleanor Bennett's whereabouts and evening plans. They were aware of the general mission directives they had received, but they also knew they would have to make many of their own decisions. Maybe this was a test. While sitting in the small hotel room and reviewing the location and the surrounding streets near where Eleanor would be dining, Chair 3 looked at the old digital clock sitting on top of the cheap desk and then said, "Are you guys about ready? We need to leave now if we want to get up in time. I think the majority of the guests will be showing up shortly."
Yeah, I've got directional mic set and ready. Once we get some waiter coats, I can conceal them. Chair 4 responded. The lapel camera is ready as well. I'll just need a minute or two once we get in place to hide it and make sure it's recording properly. Chair 5 replied. He then asked, "What are we looking for here? I mean, do you think we should just capture as much audio and video as we can during the dinner party?" I can't help but feel that we're being tested by first chair. Chair 4 responds and then says, "I don't want this evening to be a waste of time. We still need to make a plan for tomorrow and our entry into the university lab."
Well, either way, we need to not screw up. We get in and out of the dinner party. We get as much audio and video surrounding this Eleanor lady as possible tonight, who she interacts with, who she talks to, and sits with. I'm sure we'll learn something. And about tomorrow, we can figure that out later, after we get back. The university lab doesn't open until 10 a.m., so we have time, Chair 3 answered. Let's go. We still need to figure out how to get these 3 restaurant waiter coats before the dinner party begins. We all get to exercise our unique gray skills tonight, which I'm actually looking forward to. And with that, they left the small hotel, ready for that evening's unpredictable events.
Meanwhile, the El Dorado team was back at the Ponce, as the locals called it. The Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine was adopted by Flagler College in 1968. Portions of the original hotel are still available for the public to stay in. However, you have to know somebody who knows somebody to get a room, let alone 2 rooms. Well, Tom Reynolds knows that somebody, and Tom was able to secure 2 small rooms at the Ponce for the El Dorado team. As they were standing in the main lobby area, just inside the front doors, James looked at Anne, Amanda, and Olivia and then said, "I think we need to have a quick meeting about our experience at the Basilica today. There are some, important things we need to discuss, especially before we move forward with our day tomorrow." Hawthorne saw Olivia whisper something in Amanda's ear and then walk off toward the main staircase. James assumed she was heading back to her and Amanda's room.
Olivia is going to download the footage from today and do some editing. Hope that's okay, Amanda replied. I also don't think she needs to be part of this meeting anyway.
Yeah, you're probably right, Hawthorne answered. James, Anne, and Amanda made their way over to the corner sitting area that was located just outside the main lobby restaurant. James picked a small menu from the side table and scanned the list of gourmet appetizers and one-of-a-kind cocktails. The Galleon, Anchor Drop, Man Overboard, James read off the menu, then put it back down when he noticed prices started at $25. He saw Anne pick it up and put it back down as well. James then said, "A little pricey." He and Anne noticed Amanda looking through her photos on her phone.
Anne then broke the silence and said, "Okay, you two. I know you both know something I don't know, so tell me."
Give me a minute and I'll do better than that. I'll be able to show you. Amanda was scrolling through several photos on her phone. She opened the first photo she was searching for and then said, "Okay, here's the first one." She held up the screen, which had the photo on it, and then passed her phone to Anne to look at more closely.
"Okay, what am I looking at here?" Anne replied as she squinted her eyes, trying to see the words on the page that the photo was taken of. "So this looks like an old book, and, well, I think this must be connected to the church somehow."
Yeah, so let me read what this says in this paragraph. Hang with me for a moment as I read this, and then I'll show you the image of the etching I took at the church today. Amanda then read the paragraph from the page she had taken a photo of. Item 42, audit of the 1586 coastal losses. Discrepancies were noted in the official dispatches of the English fleet regarding the raid on the Florida colony. While the Admiralty records cite only a singular loss of a vessel to the elements, various local salvage petitions and Spanish testimonies of the era maintain the existence of the twin burdens of the English Armada. These sources claim two distinct hulls were surrendered to the Tempest. To date, English historians maintain the singular loss narrative, citing the local accounts as unsubstantiated legend or Spanish exaggeration. Amanda looked up and then said, "Until today, this was the only evidence or clue that there may have been a second ship of Drake's go down after he raided the St. Augustine colony. This one paragraph is the only place this has ever been mentioned, and the book that holds this one ledger entry on page 328 is the only surviving copy to date. And this book was sitting collecting dust in the rarely visited El Dorado College library, specifically in a small back room, sitting on a shelf surrounded by other old books the college obviously doesn't know what to do with."
So this ledger contradicts the main narrative and provides the discrepancy in the one shipwreck theory? Anne replied. So you and James obviously saw something on the walls in the Cochina vault room at the Basilica today that connects to this paragraph.
James sat there in silence as he listened to Amanda and Anne go back and forth. He knew Anne loved the process of discovery just as much as he did, and the only reason he and Amanda were one step ahead of Anne was that they had known what the ledger paragraph said. Now Anne had seen and read the same clues. James watched as Amanda then pulled up the photo of the etching she had taken in the small Cochino vault room at the Basilica earlier, and then showed it to Anne. Hawthorne knew Anne would connect the dots in a moment. However, he wasn't sure if she would remember Latin since it had been ages since she had studied it.
Okay, the words in this etching look to be Latin, which I'll come back to in a moment. And the image looks to be of the two broken crosses, which makes sense since this is a church. Anne was quiet as she looked more closely at the image. She then continued, I'm going to think out loud here. At first glance, I assume the two broken crosses represent either the two criminals who were crucified next to Christ, or maybe two of Christ's disciples who were crucified, possibly Peter and Andrew. However, Andrew was reported to be crucified on a diagonal cross, which neither of these is. Also, it is unlikely these broken crosses represent the crucified criminals next to Christ. Typically, whenever a cross is used, we either see it by itself or in a group of three, but never in a group of two. Anne stopped for a moment, looked up at Amanda, and then over at James, who was sitting there with a big smile on his face, and then said, I don't think these are crosses. I also have forgotten my Latin, so you are going to have to help me with that.
You're correct. These aren't crosses. I think everyone assumes they are and has never thought otherwise. James then asked, Amanda, do you mind if I translate the Latin for Anne?
"No, not at all," Amanda replied. "I can't wait to see her reaction."
James leaned over toward Anne and looked down at the image and then said, The Latin says gemina onera confrecta, which could be translated as twin burdens broken. James paused there, looked up at Anne, and could tell she had just connected the dots. He then continued, I'm assuming we are not the only ones who know what this says. However, I also assume everyone also assumes this is referring to either the crucified criminals next to Christ or two of his disciples. Either way, we have the ledger and they don't.
Gemina in Latin translates as pair or twin. Onera in Latin translates as burden or cargo, and confracta in Latin translates as broken or ruined. Amanda watches as Anne is now smiling and shaking her head in agreement, then continues, The Latin inscription and the ledger use the same words. That is not a coincidence.
And the crosses are not crosses. Those are two broken ship masts. Am I right? Anne replied.
Exactly, James answered and then added, this one word is super important, onera, a Latin word for burden. When used back then and in reference to ships, it meant that a ship was so heavily loaded with cargo that it sat deep in the water. James paused for a moment and then added, I think we can now confirm 2 of Drake's ships went down, and maybe both of those ships held heavy cargo, possibly the other materials and contents of great value.
Before we get too excited about what this means, what's next? I mean, this is pretty important information. Should we share this with Tom? Anne asked, looking at both James and Amanda.
Well, I think I'll call Dr. Conrad at the college tomorrow and give him an update. Maybe I'll do that after we get back from our boating trip, James replied and then said, if I get the okay from Dr. Conrad, then I'll share our discovery with the Historical Society crew. I feel we need to sit on this information until tomorrow. By the way, Amanda, I've got a question about something you said back at the library before we came here. Remember when I asked how you knew to look for that ledger book?
Vaguely, Amanda replied.
I didn't understand what you told me. It was a ghost. What did you mean by that? I assume you are not talking about real ghost, Hawthorne asked.
Okay, yes, now I remember, Amanda answered. By that I meant that it was customary for a fleet of ships sent out by their government or a ruling monarchy to include at least one ship in the fleet that was considered to be the ghost ship. This so-called ghost ship was not included in the official records or logged as part of the fleet.
Anne then asked, I think I'm following. So the ghost ship was there for what reasons?
This is all starting to make sense now, James then said as he gestured for Amanda to continue.
Ghost ships, as they were called back then, were used to hold and transport the plunder or the spoils of war. They were kept off the official records because, well, pirating was an international crime and illegal. No country or royal family wanted to be officially connected to pirating. It was a bloody and messy activity that strained international relations. However, Queen Elizabeth I was connected to Drake, as it was she who wanted to get back at the Spanish by disrupting their expansion into the New World at that time. Amanda paused for a moment, making sure she wasn't sounding too boring, then sat back in her chair.
Hawthorne got the attention of the restaurant hostess, who was standing a few feet away and just outside the main entrance. She was standing next to a tall, black podium stand, which held a light and the restaurant menu. He proceeded to ask about making a reservation for dinner for the following evening, around 8 p.m. They all then watched as she tapped on her handheld device, making the reservation and then confirming that it was set. She then returned to her previous position. Sorry, I know that was random, but I think we should plan for a celebration if tomorrow goes the way we think it might.
Yeah, makes sense, Anne replied, and then looked at Amanda and said, back to our discussion about the ghost ship and what we know so far. The official English records include Drake's Armada, which consists of 23 ships. However, what we are discovering is that the Armada also includes one extra ship known as the ghost ship, and this ship was referred to as the ghost ship because it was intentionally not included in the official records, because it was used to hold and transport the illegally acquired spoils of war.
Our working theory is that 2 ships in Drake's Armada sank after leaving St. Augustine. Both were potentially loaded with other materials and contents of great value, which we don't know what that means. We know that Drake returned to England with 14 bronze cannons. However, as Amanda had previously stated, the 2,000 plus gold coins never officially made it back to England. James sat there for a moment, looked at the front main doors as tourist and restaurant patrons were coming and going, and then asked, so maybe the true mystery of St. Augustine is not about whether there was 1 or 2 ships that sank, but rather, where is the hoard of gold coins and the other materials and contents of great value?
Third chair sat in the driver's seat, slouched down slightly, looking out over the steering wheel and through the front windshield as chairs 4 and 5 crossed the street, walked down the side alley, and then disappeared into the side of the building through the kitchen access door. The small earpiece in his left ear crackled, and then he heard a familiar voice say softly,
We're in and looking for the employee break room, Chair 4 whispered as he and Chair 5 walked past two female employees who seemed to be taking a break from their shift.
You are coming through clearly on my end. I'll blend in like you are hired to work the evening shift for the dinner party. If anyone asks, that's what you are here for. Chair 3 replied and then added, let's commit to a 30-minute time frame once you identify Eleanor Bennett. You and 5 get as much video and audio as you can and then leave.
4 and 5 found the small employee break room, or bag room, as it's typically called in the restaurant industry. The bag room was located in the back of the restaurant near the kitchen. It was a place where employees kept their personal belongings or other items while working a shift. This restaurant's bag room was about the same size as a large walk-in closet. It had a bank of 8 metal lockers fastened to the left inside wall, stacked 4 on 4. There was also a large whiteboard hanging on the back wall. Someone had written today's date, the words evening service, and then under that was a list of names, presumably names of the employees working the evening service shift. Chair 4 grabbed one of the whiteboard markers from a narrow desktop just under the whiteboard and quickly added 2 more names to the list. He wrote the names, Frank and Joe. Chair 4 turned around and said to Chair 5, who had been checking the employee lockers, your name is Joe tonight, and my name is Frank. Got it?
Those are dumb names. Why did you choose those? Responded Chair 5 as he continued to rummage through personal items that were in the staff lockers. He heard no response from Chair 4, so he stopped a moment and turned and looked at him.
4 was just standing there looking at 5 with an annoyed look on his face, and then responded, does it really matter? But if you really need to know, they're easy to remember and sound very American. Chair 4 then pointed past 5's head towards one of the open lockers and then said, bingo, grab those waiter jackets and let's head out front before someone comes back here. Chairs 4 and 5 took 2 clean white waiter's jackets from the open locker, put them on, and buttoned the fronts up just under the neckline, making sure not to disrupt the small hidden directional mic and camera they were wearing. They exited the bag room and walked down a short hallway toward the kitchen. As they walked past the busy and loud kitchen, they made sure not to make eye contact with any of the on-duty chefs. 4 spoke softly as they exited in the kitchen through a double swinging door and entered the quiet and peaceful main restaurant seating area. We are past the kitchen and the main seating area. Look for Miss Bennett now.
The small earpiece crackled in third chair's left ear as he got an update from Chair 4. Chair 3 then responded with, find and identify your subject and be discreet. Keep me posted with any major updates. Otherwise, stay off the air.
Chair 5 saw her first. He was glad he had studied the blurry image they had of her earlier that day. She was easy to spot as she was sitting in a larger corner section of the restaurant with several other guests. Chair 5 observed that she and other guests at the table seemed to be having a good time already. They all looked relaxed and were smiling and laughing. Chair 5 thought to himself as he nodded his head at Chair 4. All right, this is gonna be fun.
5 moved over and stood next to 4, making sure his small directional mic was pointing towards Eleanor's table. 4 heard 2 clicks come through his earpiece, which was a signal from third chair that the audio was working and recording. It also meant to stay put. Oblique, 4 said under his breath as he noticed one of the guests at Eleanor's table waving him over. You go, 4 said under his breath to 5 as he smiled and nodded his head toward the man waving them over. I'm staying here.
5 walked over to the table, unfazed that he was not a real waiter and did not know what was on the evening's menu. As he walked by an empty table, he grabbed both the drink and the food menu. He then heard 2 small clicks in his earpiece, which was the signal from Chair 3 that his hidden lapel camera was working. As he approached the table, he smiled and said, hello and welcome to the Deep Blue restaurant. I hope you are all having a good start to your evening. My name is Joe and I'll be one of the waiters tonight. How can I help you?
Chair 4 stood about 10 feet away, observing and listening to Chair 5's natural ability to connect with strangers. He was impressed, even a little jealous. He then watched as Chair 5, now Joe, the waiter, turned and walked away from Eleanor's table with the menu in hand and a big smile on his face. As 5 brushed past 4's shoulder on his way towards the bar, 4 whispered, looks like you found your calling. Don't get too comfortable. As soon as 5 left the table to submit the table's drink orders at the bar, 4 noticed Eleanor pull something from her purse and set it on table's white tablecloth. The overhead light reflected off the small, round, flat object. 4 was too far away to see exactly what it was they were all looking at, but he knew the mic was picking up the discussion, even if he could not hear it from where he was standing.
Chair 3, still sitting in the parked car, making sure the audio and video were working, heard and recorded the conversation at Eleanor's table, clear as day. He spoke softly and firmly so both 4 and 5 could hear him and said, "Get eyes on the table. I need some video of the object, possibly a coin, that Eleanor is showing her guests. As soon as you get that, get out. We'll have what we need from this evening."
Chair 5 returned from the bar, walking by 4, gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, and proceeded to deliver a tray full of cocktails to Eleanor's table. As he carefully placed each drink on the bright white tablecloth, he glanced up to see Eleanor picking up a shiny gold coin and putting it into her handbag. 4 made sure he acted like he had not seen it happen. However, he was not sure whether or not the small hidden lapel camera had captured the moment, or if the action was out of frame. As he turned around to walk back toward where 4 was still standing, he heard 2 clicks in his earpiece.
Chair 4 waited until 5 was next to him. Then, as 5 passed him, 4 turned around and followed 5 back to the kitchen and toward the bag room. They made their way back to the bag room, round the doorway into the room, and to their surprise, there was a short and stocky middle-aged man standing in front of the whiteboard with both his hands on his hips. 4 bumped 5 as 5 stopped abruptly when entering the bag room and meeting eyes with the man standing there with the whiteboard marker in his hand.
"Who the bleak are you? And who are Frank and Joe?" the man barked. There was silence for a moment, and then he said, "I don't know you. What's going on here?"
Chair 4 heard 3 clicks in his earpiece. He knew 5 heard it as well, and it meant one thing: take care of this problem now. 4 pushed 5 forward slightly toward the man and closed the door behind him, closing all 3 of them in the bag room. 3 pulled the car around the side, 4 said quietly.
Chair 5 knew the short, stocky man could probably hold his own in a fair fight, but 5 was a master of unfair fights. 5 looked the man in the eye, smiled, and then said, "I'm Joe, and this is Frank." 5 then forcefully swung open one of the locker doors, hitting the man square in the face. The sound echoed in the small room. The man's eyes rolled back in his head as he fell backwards.
Chair 4 moved past 5 as the short man stumbled back and fell against the back wall, knocking the whiteboard down and onto the floor. 4 pulled a small wallet-sized stun gun from his pocket and shoved the metal prong end into the man's left armpit, sending a 5 milliamp charge into his body. The man went limp and crumpled to the ground like a rag doll. "Check the hallway and open the back alley door. I'll check his pulse. Let's move," 4 told 5. After picking up the man, dragging him out of the back of the restaurant and into the alley, they put him in the trunk of the waiting car, got in the back seat, and left.
Chair 3 stopped the car abruptly next to an empty lot a few blocks from the downtown area, where all the fancy restaurants were located. He looked in the rearview mirror at 4 and 5 and said, "Jump out and grab one of those cinder blocks lying over there next to that fence."
Chair 5 replied, "I'll do it." Within a minute, he was back in the car with a heavy old cinder block sitting between his feet. 5 could tell Chair 4 was uneasy with this type of work, but they all knew this kind of activity comes with a job sometimes.
15 minutes later,
3 stopped the car on the side of the bridge at its highest point, hoping the water depth below was at its deepest point. He then said, "You know what to do. Do it quickly."
Chairs 4 and 5 got out of the car, opened the trunk, smacked the restaurant worker in the head a few times, and then tied the heavy cinder block to the man's feet with a short piece of rope they found in the spare tire wheel well. 4 could tell the man was still half conscious, so he said, "Hurry up and grab his upper body. I'll grab the block and his feet. Let's make this quick before any cars come upon us." 4 and 5 heaved the man and the heavy cinder block over the side of the bridge and watched as the man fell silently for a few seconds before hitting the dark water below with a muffled splash. And just like that, the problem disappeared.
Bobby steered his pride and joy through the inner harbor and then out into the open ocean. The water was calm and still, with the occasional small swell. For this particular outing, Bobby chose to use the 30-foot Center Council cruiser. He knew he did not need to bring all the fishing gear as his out-of-town guests just wanted to take a morning boat tour of the harbor and sections of the coastline. They weren't doing any fishing, which Bobby was happy about since his young deckhand called in sick earlier that morning. Bobby looked back at his passengers, who were sitting quietly, looking out at the open ocean and the shoreline.
James and Ann Hawthorne were sitting opposite Tom Reynolds and Amanda Chase in the stern, while Olivia and Cece were sitting up in the bow section. The boat had 2 large outboard motors which hummed as they cruised gently north just off the coastline. The sun had already come up, and the sky was still glowing from the sunrise. Tom and Amanda were in a lively conversation about Tom's time with Lieutenant Walsh and what the investigation had uncovered so far. Hawthorne overheard Amanda reassuring Tom that she believed they could still keep moving forward with their research and schedule despite not having the documents from the Historical Society. Anne was just sitting there quietly, taking in the scenery and the stillness of the sea. James was as well. However, he noticed something off in the distance on the shoreline that caught his attention. From their distance, he couldn't tell what it was, so he stood halfway up, pointed towards the thing in the distance, and then said loudly, "Hey, Bobby, what is that off in the distance? It looks like a clump of something or a structure."
Bobby turned his head to the left and stared in the direction Hawthorne was pointing, and then replied, "Oh, that cluster of large rock and small hills in the distance? Well, that's on private property, and it's called Coquina Hills."
"What is Coquina Hills?" Hawthorne asked.
It's basically a clump of small natural hills and rocks faces located on private land. It's an expensive piece of real estate, and it's been in the same family for a long time now. Boats can use it to navigate the shoreline since it's easy to see on clear day. Bobby continued as he turned the boat around and started heading south back towards the main entrance to the St. Augustine Harbor. Supposedly, there are old Native American pictographs on the rock faces in the hills, hundreds of years old. But the property owner is a very private person and doesn't like outsiders. Something about it being sacred to the Native Americans who used to inhabit this area, so it's closed off to the public.
Amanda looked over at Tom and then said, "What chance do you think we could go see those rocks?"
Tom smiled and then said, "Well, I went there many years ago, as the family invited a few of us out from the Historical Society to come inspect some of the images on the rocks. It was quite interesting, but they only allowed us to stay for an hour. Not enough time to inspect the whole area. I suppose we could ask again if you think this may be helpful to our current research. No harm in asking, I suppose."
Cece was listening to the conversation and then jumped in and added, "Funny you bring this up. My grandpa grew up with the old guy who now owns the land. I went there as a kid a few times, but didn't really pay much attention to the rock carvings. I probably could get us a visit if my grandpa is willing to give the older lady a call. The husband has since passed away, but his wife still lives on the property, I think."
Tom then said, "Really, Cece? Your family is so well connected here. You keep surprising me. I'm so glad we hired you last year. Yeah, why don't you have your grandpa make the call? Couldn't hurt."
"That'd be great, Cece. Maybe that is our afternoon activity," Amanda replied.
"Well, I'm glad I asked. Could be nothing or it could be something," Hawthorne added. "Either way, I think it's worth our while to try and go see."
Bobby pulled the boat back into the harbor and then docked in the marina like a pro. As he helped the team out of the boat, he said, "If you need anything else, you know where to find me, right here."
Cece immediately made a call to her grandpa's house, knowing his in-home nurse answered the phone. Cece asked to speak with her grandpa and then waited for the nurse to take him on the phone. After Cece's grandpa got on the phone, she convinced him to call Mrs. Dickerson, the owner of the large property and an old friend of his, and asked if a small group of people could visit her property that afternoon. Cece then ended the call and waited. About 5 minutes later, to Cece's surprise, and while the team was still discussing lunch plans while standing by the rental car, her grandpa's in-house caregiver called back and then put her grandpa back on the phone. Cece's eye lit up as she listened and then ended the call with a "Wow, that was fast. You're the best, Grandpa. Thank you. I'm going to come see you soon."
Amanda noticed Cece's smile as the lunch discussion was still ongoing and then asked, "It sounds like we have our afternoon activity planned."
"Yep," Cece replied, and then looked at the group and said, "I can make this lunch decision easy for you all. Let me take you to one of my favorite Cuban sandwich shops."
Minna was pacing back and forth in the safe house living room, periodically stopping to glance out the large picture window, which faced east towards the Atlantic Ocean. The safe house was actually a condo unit located in the new development north of St. Augustine. The table had temporarily leased the large and spacious penthouse unit, which sat atop of a 5-story building. From this vantage point, You could see out towards the ocean. It provided a great view, which helped calm Midnight's nerves while she waited for a report from chairs 3, 4, and 5. All of a sudden, her phone beeped with an incoming message. It was from chair 3. It read, "Both objectives successful. Small issue last evening, but we took care of it. Documents are authentic. Returning later today." Midnight turned around and looked at chair 6, who was watching a show on the large TV, and said, "Looks like the guys were successful. However, they mentioned there was an issue. They're on their way back now."
Chair 6 barely glanced over toward Midnight and gave her a thumbs up, then turned back to watch the show. She then said, "US reality shows are fascinating. I can't believe people actually watch this stuff."
Professor Hawthorne followed Tom and Cece as Tom drove down this long, overgrown dirt and weed-filled road. Team was permitted to enter a secluded property owned by a friend of Cece's grandpa. Mrs. Dickerson was her name, and she was very old. Cece had guessed she was in her late 90s. After parking, they approached a makeshift barbed wire fence gate that held several signs that read, "Trespassers will be shot on sight," and "Beware of dogs and gators." And finally, a more civil sign that read, "No trespassing private property." Hawthorne looked over at Tom and Cece as they stood in front of the closed gate and then said, "I guess this family takes their privacy seriously."
They do, Tom replied and then added, "As do many Floridians who live outside the cities. You just have to be careful. Lots of folks in these parts carry."
Amanda looked over at Tom, somewhat confused by his statement, and then asked, "What do you mean by carry? Carry what?"
Tom made the shape of a gun with his forefinger and thumb as he looked back at Amanda and then said, "Our state gun laws are a lot different than California's."
"Yeah, but if you were born and raised here, you don't know any different," Cece said, and then patted her small shoulder bag as if to communicate silently. "I can carry, and it's my right."
Hawthorne caught on to what Cece was implying, and he saw her gesture to her shoulder bag and smile. He then asked, changing the subject, "How do we get into this property? Is someone coming to meet us here at the gate?" At that moment, there was a sound of an approaching vehicle coming on the other side of the closed gate, coming toward them rather quickly. Hawthorne then said, "Well, I guess that answers my question."
"That's probably little Riley," Cece replied. "He's Mrs. Dickerson's great-grandson, and he lives here on the property. His mom and dad are both in prison. At least I think they still are. They were cooking up meth and got caught when one of their outbuildings blew up. Supposedly, state conservation workers saw it from the road and reported the incident. The authorities had a terrible time arresting the two. I guess the father, Mrs. Dickerson's grandson, was quite the deadbeat. Anyway, the state awarded custody of little Riley to Mrs. Dickerson." Cece then said as they watched Riley come cruising down the narrow dirt lane on a large four-wheeler towards the front gate. "You know, people in town talk, so that's the word on the street."
Riley, who had just turned 11, squeezed the handbrake and pushed down on the foot brake as he approached the front gate at a high rate of speed. The four-wheeler slid to a stop, kicking up some dust toward the group of people who were standing on the other side of the closed gate, just looking at him. Riley smiled and then said, "Where's Cece?"
Cece, stepping up to the gate, then said, "Here I am, Riley. Wow, you've gotten big."
Riley smirked and then replied, "That's what happens when you grow up." He got off the four-wheeler, pulled a key from his dirty pants pocket, and unlocked and opened the gate. "You can follow me in your cars."
And a huge thank you to our Student Council President and Vice President for giving us a roadmap of what it truly means to lead with impact here at ICS. From banquets, spreadsheets to the cultural heart of the student body, it's clear that leadership isn't just a title, it's a service. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. Tune in next time as we continue our mystery and bring you more stories from the heart of our campus and beyond. I'm your host, Mr. Jason, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. And as always, this podcast would not be possible without the hard work and support of our international student production team.
All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com, a vibrant community of creatives sharing copyright-free images, videos, and music.
And we're signing off until next time. We are Students Incorporated, because your voice matters.